Today on our 325i, we get in there and actually replace the timing belt, water pump, and some other stuff, you know, while we're in there. Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again for another installment of Project Beige Box E30. That's our 1990 BMW 325i. So last episode you saw us uncovering that timing belt. Today we get back in there, we replace that, the water pump, the tensioner, everything else you do while you're in there. We'll also hit up the cap and rotor, which look to be original. So let's just knock out a whole bunch of heavy duty stuff today. Enough yapping, let's get our wrenches dirty. How about we pull this water pump out of here? It's done its duty. It doesn't leak. Car never overheated. But again, if you're doing timing belt, you might as well do water pump too, right? So let's get it out of there. There's gonna be 3 bolts, 13 millimeter size. There we have it. Not too crusty, guys. Here's the old water pump. Big thing is you got to scrape the rest of this gasket off. It is a softer kind of gasket. You want to make sure you get all of that off. You don't want to go to the trouble installing the new one, filling it up with coolant and watching that coolant leak down the front of your engine. Now it's time for us to remove the tensioner pulley, so we'll have slack on our belt and you're able to remove it at that time. All you really need to do is loosen that bolt and you should be able to slide the pulley away from the belt, and that should make everything nice and slack. Isn't there like a hidden bolt on this thing somewhere, if I remember correctly? I forgot that this long thing here is actually, looks like an 18 is getting the trick done. Yeah, I don't remember this on the older versions of this car, but this should allow our tensioner to fall right off. And then you can fish that spring and long adjustment bolt out of your drip pan. Everything wants to come off as one. Just a little snug down there, but looking pretty good. Here's the old timing belt, by the way. Looks great, actually. Yes, very low mileage. This thing was hardly used, but a belt that has sat for, what is it, 15 years? Yeah, we're not gonna trust that, are we? With your timing covers and timing belt and everything out of the way, water pump removed, let's go ahead and clean the front of the engine at this time. Chances are yours is a little funky. Mine is not that bad comparatively to what I've seen for cars of the equal vintage of this, but you want to get in there and scrub in some of these back areas, clean these water tubes that clearly have had coolant sitting in for a while. Put some paper towels, whatever you want, cloths to block some of those access holes, especially where the water pump goes, but we also need to clear that mating surface. So if you look around the water pump here, you can still see some of the old gasket. You want to get a razor blade and nice and easily scrape that stuff off without making any big gouges that are going to prevent the new gasket from sealing correctly. So yeah, it's a great time to clean everything up under here. Make it look really nice before we put everything back together. Also, I'm going to be replacing more seals than most will do on the engine. I just want to block everywhere that could potentially leak oil, even though it's not leaking oil right now. So I've got the seal for the cam here. I've also got the one for the oil pump and the crank. So I'm gonna remove all those. I might not include it in this video because this is usually above and beyond. A lot of people don't replace those every time they do the timing belt. But if you have a leak or something, I'll make a separate video just for doing all the front seals on the engine. I am trying to make this as quick as possible, so we'll just go ahead and breeze over that. Let's get it cleaned up and I'll put those videos out at a later time. All right, we've cleaned up the front of the engine quite a bit here. Now it's time to get a nice little razor blade out and clear off the rest of this gasket. What you're seeing is that napkin stuffed in the water pump hole there, so none of the debris falls in there. But you kind of just want to go around. The old gasket kind of fuses. You can see a big chunk fall off there. It kind of fuses with the block of the engine, so you want to take that off with a razor. All right, I feel pretty good about the front of this engine block now. You guys know how I am about cleaning up, so looking a lot more shiny down here. even more important than being just shiny is making sure there's no extra gunk all over the engine. So it's looking pretty clean. Again, we're still gonna pull this valve cover off and everything, but very happy with how this looks for the installation of our new water pump and timing belt. It's always nice to clean up under here like this. So here's our water pump for our E30 325i. As you can see, the gasket's already on there, but it will slide around a lot, which makes installation kind of a pain in the butt. Now, with other cars with a similar setup, I've always used the RTV trick, where you put a thin layer of RTV around here next to the water pump and the gasket, so it kind of glues it on, and a little bit on the back that acts as a little extra insurance. I know a lot of people say, hey, just slap it on there, but hey, I've done a ton of water pumps on various engines, various cars, various makes, and this is the tried and true method. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and it's less of a heartache as you kind of try to bolt this thing on. So, and there we go, we have our brand new water pump installed. Now you want to take your handy dandy torque wrench of choice. You use my old 3/8 driver one, and set everything on these bolts. You want to set this to 16 foot-pounds, and go ahead and snug those bolts up correctly. You don't want to overdo it. This is an aluminum water pump. Perfect. Water pump installed and torque spec. Time to put the timing belt back on, and to do that we need to put our tensioner in place. Always a great idea to replace that tensioner unit. You never know if that one's gonna fail. Why go to all this labor, put it back in? So I always swap over the tensioner when I do a timing belt water pump job. And I took a wire wheel, of course, to all my hardware like I always do. So first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and loosely tighten in this bottom bolt here. It is upside down looking from the front of the engine, but if you were to think, if you're looking from the engine, it should always face towards it. That's how I've always done them, so I'm not gonna change it up now. With the belt slid on, you want to go ahead and release the tensioner now, which will actually put tension on the belt, if that makes sense. So we're going to just loosen this a little bit. And you should see the tensioner slide towards the driver's side of the vehicle. Now what I like to do is rotate the engine 2 to 3 times, go back to top dead center, and that should take all the slack out of the belt. Grab what you can with a 22mm socket. Make sure the vehicle is in neutral for this part. This is really important. And we're gonna go ahead and start turning the engine at this time. And make sure your lines are good, and we are. Great. At this time, we need to tighten a couple things. We're going to go ahead and tighten our tensioner in place, the top bolt and the bottom bolt. Let's go ahead and tighten both those down at this time. You also want to check deflection too. You should have a little play. Very over-tightened timing belt kind of make a growling noise. I've heard that before. And way loose, which you really mess something up, a slapping noise against the timing cover usually. So either of those things are not desirable. And our timing belt is on and tensioned correctly. When it comes time to install the Harmonic pulley and its associated parts, this disc goes on very easily. There's a guide pin hole right here, so you cannot mess that up. It slides on only one way. Same with the Harmonic pulley right over it. And then you get to put those bolts through, which are super fun. Yay. Let's slide this part on first. I like to do this from the bottom of the vehicle. It can be a little easier. Well, this one I can do from the top. I'll do the pulley from the bottom. The other tip is also put a 22mm socket and a big enough wrench on the crank to counter you tightening all these bolts, and that'll give you the most resistance. Also make sure your vehicle is in gear. So we want to put our crank position sensor back on there, and there's this other sensor that goes under the air conditioner bracket. If you guys remember this, you don't want to forget this because it runs for some reason under the bracket. Actually, maybe we can put it somewhere where it doesn't go through the bracket. Maybe it can just go on top, and that would make the next person's life a lot easier. Now there is a little wire cover here that snaps in over here, so you're gonna actually run your wires for both the position sensor. And they kind of snap down in here. You can see the two areas. Make life a little easier by pulling these tabs out. There we go. The other sensor is way easier to access underneath, so we'll go down here. And you'll see where it clicks in. It's basically straight down from your oil filter area. So you want to grab that sensor. All right. Oh, sensors are good. So replacing all the major coolant lines is pretty obvious to do on this kind of a job. These look like the originals. You can see there's lots of crud built up inside of them. You can see swelling, I mean right there, very unnatural swelling. Usually around where the hose clamps are, and some discoloration, some kind of dry rot going on. This is saving yourself a headache. This is the kind of stuff that will get you stranded. So go ahead, swap these out. It isn't that big of a price thing. You've already got to pull everything off anyway, so make sure you're doing that. So we got a fresh one right here, as you can see. Very uniform hose, not all swollen and discombobulated, I guess. I don't know. It's just a mess in there, so do it up, guys. So I'm seeing a lot of wear on the cap. The points look pretty worn down, and then the rotor itself is super rough. Could be part of the reason the car was idling kind of rough. So not a bad time while we're in there before we buckle it all back up to swap that out. Plugs have been changed. The wires are in good shape, so there's no sense to change those. Not a bad idea to swap that cap and rotor out. Pretty straightforward. You're gonna put each one, you can see the number on the actual plug wire, to the corresponding new cap and rotor. So this part should be pretty easy. Well, if they've been on there for a while, you might need to get a screwdriver. We've got our brand new cap here. We're gonna go ahead and put on. As you can see, all the points look much nicer. We can do a side-by-side right now if you'd like. What you're looking for inside of a worn section is all this kind of residue. You can see the scouring marks. The points look really worn down in there. So that's it. You're looking at old versus new here. Now make sure you plug these wires into the corresponding number. All right, comparing our old versus new here, you can see clearly that the contact point is clean, shiny, flat. This is extremely gouged on the old one. So it's gonna make a way smoother contact, should help our idle. The one thing that changes, these aren't Allen key, these are just standard Phillips, so we'll just, a little mix up there, but should still be the same. Time to install our new rotor. So go ahead and make sure you put this backing plate in first. Just kind of rests right there. All right, and time to secure our cap back on there. All right, time to throw some new belts on. We've got everything pretty much aligned. You want to keep your tensioners loose. Your little adjustment tensioners on each of your accessories here. We're gonna put the belts on, tighten them up. We should be good to go there. Just put the water pump pulley on. Pretty straightforward. And then next we'll put that fan probably back on and slide that radiator in. Fun. All right, let's get these belts on. Since we're putting new coolant lines in, we're gonna use this plastic crossover section. We still need to use that, so we're gonna go ahead and remove these ends, replace them with these new pieces. It's always a smart thing to do, especially in an older car. These all look to be original coolant lines, radiator hoses, so why risk it? Why put it all back together and have something old that can fail you? So let's just pop these off, just flathead. All right, time to replace the fan. You can remember how much fun it was to remove. We're now about to drop in the radiator and the fan shroud, which I've already attached to the radiator. It's gonna be pretty tight getting around the fan and everything, so just be careful, don't force it. You don't wanna break any fan blades or anything else. Something that helps is I kept the upper radiator hose off so it wouldn't get in the way. And you can kind of bend back this lower one here as best you can to kind of keep it from interfering. But we should be able to slide down there. You have your temp sensor too, right here, that you need to attach. Be wary of that. But basically just check for any items that are going to interfere and go nice and slow. Do not break your fan blades. Get a clamp on there, the lower radiator hose, and there's a top bracket that helps attach this to the actual vehicle itself. This little guy right here, so we'll go ahead and install that again. Went in there pretty smoothly. Obviously check, this is the time you want to check for clearances. If you have anything that's interfering with where the fan spins, that's going to be a real big issue down the line. You want to make sure your coolant lines that you did, or your coolant hoses that you ran earlier, are all out of the way. Everything's where it should be. It's a real important visual inspection. You also want to make sure that your fan is not going to be interfering with your shroud in any way. That's another big issue. You don't want to destroy either of those items. So go ahead, check all that over, put the upper one on, and we should be solid. All right, time to install our final coolant line. Our radiator hose right here on the top goes like so. So we're gonna go ahead and put our bands on previously. Another thing you don't wanna forget is your temp sensor that goes on the radiator over there. So go ahead and lock that into place too. We'll get that in a second. So don't forget about that guy. Now to install our upper radiator support, real simple. Just gotta line up with these holes. All right, time to top the coolant up. The first thing you want to do is open up this bleeder valve right here, and that allows the air to come out when you're filling the system. Now eventually you will see coolant start leaking out of here at the thermostat housing at the screw, so tighten it down at that time. Here's where you fill up at. There we go. Coolant topped off.